There's a painful moment every empath eventually faces, the one where your heart finally catches up to what your intuition has been whispering all along. You're being used. You start to notice how every conversation revolves around their needs, how every crisis becomes your responsibility, and how your kindness is treated like a free resource instead of a gift. You've spent so long trying to be the healer, the listener, the one who understands, but now you see the truth. You were never being valued, you were being drained. That's when everything changes. You stop confusing manipulation for love and guilt for loyalty. You begin to realize that the person you've been saving was never planning to save you. And from that moment on, your empathy transforms from a weakness into your greatest form of strength, awareness. If you've ever felt emotionally exhausted from giving too much, this video is for you. Subscribe to Brainy Empath, like this video, and comment, "My empathy has boundaries." Because the moment you see through the manipulation, you stop being the victim and start becoming the healer of yourself. They notice the one-sided pattern. First, the empath doesn't realize it's happening. They think they've just found someone who needs a little extra care, someone lost, misunderstood, or hurting. So they listen a little longer, forgive a little faster, and give a little more than they should. They convince themselves that love means patience, that understanding means endurance. But slowly, a strange feeling starts to settle in their chest: exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from helping someone once in a while, but the kind that grows after being emotionally drained, day after day, with nothing ever coming back. They start noticing that the balance in the relationship never shifts. When the other person needs advice, comfort, or reassurance, the empath is always there, reliable, calm, ready to give. But when the empath needs to be heard, the energy changes. The listener becomes distant. The conversation gets redirected. Suddenly, the empath's emotions are too heavy, too complicated, or simply ignored. They realize they've been cast into a permanent role: the giver, the fixer, the one who fills the emotional gaps no one else wants to handle. Then comes the guilt. Every time they think about pulling back, that soft inner voice whispers, "You can't just leave them like this. You're the only one who understands it's a trap." The same empathy that makes them kind also makes them easy to use. They don't want to believe they're being taken for granted, so they rationalize it. Maybe they're just stressed. Maybe I'm expecting too much. But deep down, they know the truth. The giving has become one-sided, and the warmth they once felt now feels cold and transactional. Eventually, that quiet awareness turns into clarity. They start replaying past moments, the times they comforted someone who never checked on them after, the times their forgiveness was expected but never returned. And it hits them. They weren't in a mutual relationship. They were in an emotional arrangement. Their kindness wasn't being reciprocated, it was being consumed. That's the moment everything shifts. The empath begins to see the difference between helping someone and being used by someone. They realize that real connection isn't built on constant sacrifice. It's built on balance. And once they see that pattern clearly, they can't unsee it. The same empathy that once blinded them now becomes their vision. And from that moment forward, they start choosing people who give as much as they take. They feel drained instead of fulfilled. There comes a point when the empath realizes that love shouldn't leave them empty. At first, they mistake exhaustion for compassion, believing that feeling emotionally tired after every conversation is just part of caring deeply. They tell themselves that the heaviness in their chest means they've done something good, that they've helped someone heal. But over time, they notice a pattern. Every time they give, they feel weaker. Every time they listen, they feel smaller. And the peace they used to feel when helping others slowly turns into quiet resentment. They start to see that the connection they thought was mutual is actually one-sided. The other person always leaves feeling lighter, unburdened, refreshed, while the empath is left carrying the emotional weight of both. It's like being a sponge, soaking up other people's pain until there's no room left to breathe. The empath begins to dread the very conversations that used to make them feel purposeful. What used to be a source of meaning has become a drain on their energy, their focus, even their joy. That's when the truth becomes undeniable. This isn't love, it's depletion. They start noticing how often they leave interactions feeling anxious or emotionally heavy, while the other person walks away smiling, relieved. They begin to understand that not everyone wants to heal. Some people just want to unload. And when you're an empath, that difference matters more than anything, because giving to someone who refuses to grow doesn't make you kind, it makes you empty. Eventually, the empath reaches a quiet breaking point. They stop mistaking burnout for loyalty. They stop believing that being drained is the price of being good. They realize that the people who truly care for them don't leave them feeling used. They leave them feeling grounded, calm, and seen. It's a painful awakening, but also a powerful one, because once an empath feels the deep fatigue of giving without receiving, they learn the value of preservation. They understand that their energy is sacred and that it's not selfish to protect it, it's survival. From that day on, they stop offering themselves to those who only take. They stop confusing self-destruction with compassion. And in that decision, they finally begin to feel whole again. They realize guilt has been used as control. For an empath, guilt is the easiest way to be controlled and the hardest thing to recognize. It doesn't come as open manipulation at first. It comes disguised as emotional dependence, as gentle phrases that sound like affection. You're the only one who understands me. I don't know what I'd do without you. Those words make the empath feel needed, special, even chosen. But slowly, they start noticing that this need never ends. Every time they try to rest, take space, or focus on themselves, they're made to feel selfish. It's subtle at first, a disappointed tone, a guilt-laced sigh, a reminder of how much the other person sacrifices for them. The empath's heart tightens. They don't want to hurt anyone, so they give in again. They cancel plans, ignore their own needs, and keep showing up, even when it costs them peace. Because deep down, they've been conditioned to believe that good people don't say no, that love means staying, no matter how drained you are. But over time, the cracks start to show. They realize that the person who claims to need them doesn't actually want their well-being, they want their availability. They start noticing the pattern. Every act of kindness is expected, every boundary becomes an offense, and every attempt to step back is met with guilt. The empath begins to see the manipulation clearly. The guilt isn't coming from love, it's coming from fear. Fear of losing control, fear of no longer being the center of attention. That's when something inside them shifts. They stop apologizing for needing space. They stop feeling responsible for someone else's emotions. They understand that true love doesn't use guilt as a leash. It gives freedom, not obligation. And in that realization, the empath begins to reclaim their power. It's not an easy awakening. The first time they say no, the silence feels heavy. The other person may react with anger, tears, or even blame. But the empath doesn't fall for it anymore. They've learned that guilt is the weapon of the emotionally dependent, and they refuse to be a target. When an empath sees guilt for what it truly is, control, they stop feeding it with compliance. They let the silence stand, they let the guilt fade, and for the first time, they feel something they haven't felt in a long time: freedom. They stop explaining their kindness. For most of their life, the empath has felt the need to justify why they care so much. They explain their intentions over and over, trying to prove that their kindness isn't weakness, their forgiveness isn't foolishness, and their empathy isn't naivety. But after being used, drained, and misunderstood for too long, something changes. They stop explaining, not because they've stopped caring, but because they've learned that genuine kindness doesn't need to be defended. They realize that some people don't actually want to understand kindness, they just want to exploit it. When the empath forgives, they're accused of being naive. When they walk away quietly, they're called cold. When they show patience, they're mistaken for someone easy to manipulate. The more they try to explain their motives, the more people twist them. So they stop trying. They no longer give detailed reasons for their compassion or long apologies for setting boundaries. They understand that those who truly know their heart never need an explanation, and those who demand one will never deserve it. At this stage, their kindness becomes quieter but stronger. It's no longer performative or self-sacrificial, it's deliberate. They give when it feels right, not when it's expected. They forgive when it brings them peace, not when someone pressures them to. They help out of choice, not obligation, and when others misunderstand it, they don't rush to fix the perception, they simply let it go. It's one of the most powerful transitions an empath can experience. The moment they stop explaining themselves and start living in alignment with what feels right, they realize that true kindness doesn't ask for understanding or validation. It simply exists, calm, firm, and free of expectation. People may still misjudge them, call them distant or uncaring, but it doesn't matter anymore because for the first time, the empath's kindness is no longer a burden, it's a boundary. They know who they are, and that's enough. They see through emotional manipulation. There's a moment when the empath's vision finally clears, when the fog of guilt, confusion, and misplaced compassion lifts, and they begin to see manipulation for what it truly is. It's no longer subtle, it's obvious. The patterns, once disguised as love or care, now reveal themselves as control. They start noticing how every guilt trip, every exaggerated crisis, and every sudden act of affection was timed perfectly to pull them back in. What once looked like emotional vulnerability now looks like strategy. They begin to remember the cycles, how every time they tried to leave or create distance, the manipulator suddenly changed. There were apologies, tears, and promises that never lasted. The empath used to believe those moments meant progress, but now they see the truth. Those gestures weren't signs of growth, they were tactics of survival. The manipulator never wanted connection, they wanted control. It hits the empath deeply. The realization hurts, not because they feel fooled, but because they finally understand how much of themselves they gave away in the name of love. How many sleepless nights they spent trying to understand someone who never intended to be understood. But this time, instead of blaming themselves, they step back. They watch. They analyze. They stop reacting to every emotional display. They no longer rush to fix tears that are meant to trap or to soothe anger that's designed to dominate. Their silence becomes their shield. They realize that true empathy doesn't mean absorbing manipulation, it means recognizing it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The empath starts trusting their instincts again, that subtle inner signal that used to whisper, something feels off. They stop second guessing it. They stop over explaining it. They simply trust it. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming conscious. They can still feel deeply, but now their emotions serve them, not others' agendas. They stop falling for dramatics, for empty words, for guilt dressed as affection. The manipulator loses their power the moment the empath sees the pattern. And from that day on, the empath no longer reacts to manipulation, they rise above it. Quietly, calmly, powerfully. They learn that love without respect is exploitation. It takes the empath years to learn this truth, that love, no matter how deep or passionate it seems, is worthless without respect. They've spent so much of their life confusing kindness for connection, mistaking self-sacrifice for love, believing that if they gave more, understood more, and endured more, things would eventually change. But one day, they wake up and realize that love alone isn't enough. When respect is missing, love turns into a transaction. It becomes one person giving endlessly while the other takes without hesitation. They start to see how often they've accepted poor treatment under the illusion of love. They remember the times they were spoken over, dismissed, or blamed, and how they still stayed, hoping that love would fix it. They now understand that love isn't supposed to hurt their self-worth or make them question their value. True love doesn't silence you, it doesn't drain you, and it never demands that you betray yourself to keep someone else comfortable. That realization changes everything. They stop tolerating people who use affection as leverage. They stop romanticizing inconsistency. They no longer chase people who only show love when it's convenient. The empath finally sees that respect is the foundation, and without it, even the most emotional bond turns into quiet exploitation. For the first time, they begin to define love differently. It's no longer about intensity or chemistry, it's about safety, honesty, and effort. They crave peace more than passion and consistency more than promises. They realize that anyone who truly loves them will never make them feel small or guilty for needing respect. This lesson transforms them. They no longer beg to be understood or stay to be appreciated. Instead, they choose alignment over attachment. They stop calling chaos connection and start calling it what it is: emotional dependence disguised as love. And once they see the truth, they can't unsee it. Love without respect isn't love, it's exploitation dressed up as affection. And the empath, who once gave endlessly without boundaries, now walks away the moment love asks them to shrink. They reclaim their energy and self worth. After years of pouring into others, the empath finally turns inward. And what they find there changes everything. For so long, their energy was spent holding people together, soothing chaos, and fixing what was never their responsibility to fix. They were always the steady hand in someone else's storm, but rarely their own. The more they gave, the more they disappeared into the background of other people's stories. But when they finally step away from those who took advantage of their compassion, something powerful begins to happen. They start to feel alive again. At first, it's strange. The silence feels unfamiliar. The space they used to fill with others' emotions suddenly becomes their own. But slowly, that space starts to feel like peace. The energy that once went into keeping everyone else happy now fuels their own growth. They start sleeping better, thinking clearer, breathing easier. For the first time in a long time, they aren't running on empty. They begin rediscovering the parts of themselves they lost along the way: their creativity, their confidence, their voice. They realize their worth was never tied to how much they gave or how deeply they cared. It was always within them. The validation they used to chase from others now comes from within. They stop needing to be chosen because they finally choose themselves. And as their energy returns, their standards rise. They stop tolerating half-effort and one-sided connections. They no longer feel guilty for saying no or walking away from what drains them. They learn that peace isn't selfish, it's sacred. The more they protect it, the stronger they become. Their kindness becomes grounded, not exploitable. Their empathy turns into wisdom, not weakness. It's one of the most empowering transformations an empath can experience, realizing that the same energy once used to heal others can rebuild their own life. They don't need permission to take up space, to rest, to recharge, to be whole. They finally understand that protecting their energy is the same as protecting their worth. And once they reclaim both, they stop being a source for others to drain and start becoming a light that no one can dim again. They choose distance over drama. The final shift in the empath's transformation is quiet but absolute. They stop arguing, explaining, and trying to prove their intentions. They simply choose distance, not out of anger, but out of deep understanding. They've learned that peace doesn't come from fixing people or forcing clarity. It comes from walking away from anything that thrives on chaos. Where they once would have stayed to calm the storm, now they simply step out of it. They no longer chase closure from those who built their worth on confusion. They don't defend their decisions to people committed to misunderstanding them. They've accepted that some people need drama the way others need air. It's how they feel alive. But empaths, after all the pain they've endured, no longer want to live in emotional survival mode. They crave calm, not conflict. And once they've tasted real peace, the noise of manipulation and toxicity becomes unbearable. Now, when tension rises or guilt appears, they don't react. They don't fight back. They don't try to correct the lies or explain the silence. They simply detach. Distance becomes their boundary, their healing, and their power. They've learned that protecting their peace doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it just means disappearing quietly, without warning or resentment. This is the moment the empath stops being easy to reach. They stop being accessible to those who drained them, used them, or took their compassion for granted. They stop giving second chances to the same behavior, wearing a different excuse. Their calm presence, once freely given, becomes rare and earned. What used to look like coldness to others is actually healing. What used to feel like loneliness now feels like freedom. Distance isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. It's the empath's way of saying, I don't hate you, I just love myself more now. And once they reach that level of peace, they never go back to the chaos that broke them. They've learned that silence and distance can say everything words never could, and that sometimes walking away isn't the end of empathy, it's the beginning of self-respect. At some point, every empath reaches their breaking point. Not the loud kind filled with anger, but the silent kind where they finally realize their worth. They stop chasing understanding from people who never intended to understand them. They stop mistaking chaos for connection and exhaustion for love. Instead, they choose peace. They choose space. They choose themselves. And that's when everything changes. Their absence starts to speak louder than all the explanations they once gave. The people who drain them begin to notice the quiet. Because when an empath stops showing up, the balance of every relationship shifts. The calm they once gave freely now returns to them, and that peace becomes their new identity. They don't need revenge, closure, or validation. Their healing is the closure. Their distance is the statement. If this message resonated with you, it's probably because you felt that same exhaustion, the kind that comes from caring too much for too long. So take this as your reminder. Your peace is not selfish, it's sacred, protected. If you felt seen in this video, subscribe to Brainy Empath, like this video, and comment, "I choose peace." Because when an empath finally learns to protect their energy, they stop being used and start being unstoppable.